And welcome back, footy fans, to another episode of Donnie's Disposals. And ladies and gentlemen, we have the debut, the first ever VFL Vantage episode of Donnie's Disposals as we go through the first two rounds of the VFL and VFLW. And to help me talk about the wonderful competition that is the VFL is a good friend of mine who I met on Twitter and a huge VFL reporter down in the Melbourne area, Mr. Brendan Rhodes. Brendan, thank you for joining me today.
G'day, Donny. Great to be with you, and yeah, fantastic to see people like yourself and Brian Barish and World Footy News. These guys bringing our great game to the world, which is it's fantastic to see, and yeah, hopefully more and more people get on board.
I genuinely appreciate it. I got into the state sides over the off season, talking with a few state league supporters. I had the luxury of talking to a Frankston supporter, a Port Melbourne supporter, and they were absolutely fascinating. So I thought let's dive into it. Let's do some reviewing of this stuff because I think sometimes the state league doesn't always get the publications that the AFL does, especially over here. So I thought let's take that opportunity and talk about it. So let's go to it. We didn't get a chance to preview it because things have been kind of nuts and up here, but the VFL has started. Two rounds are up, two rounds are down. Really quickly, before we get into the nuts and bolts, just a real quick kind of your thoughts on both the men and the women's first two rounds of the season.
Very even for the most part. There's obviously been a couple of one-sided games which you get in any competition, but for those that don't know, the VFL is effectively the AFL reserves, mostly being 14 of the AFL teams have their reserves team, their second grade team in the VFL. The only ones that don't are the teams from Adelaide and Perth. Plus, 7 standalone teams at VFL level who are not attached to any AFL team at all, and that is Coburg, Frankston, Northern Bullants, which was Preston before it changed its name. Not Sandringham, sorry, I've gone blank there. Williamstown and Port Melbourne, Werribee, and Southport out of Queensland. So there's the 7. So we have a 21 team competition, which is a lot over here in Australia. It's probably not so much over there in America with your 32 teams in the in the NBA and the NFL and all that. But yeah, it's certainly interesting, and it means you've got to be good for the whole season to have a chance to play in the finals.
Yeah, it definitely. I remember looking at it and I went, wow, there's a lot of teams in the VFL, at least on the men's side. Women's side, not as much. There's not as many unattached teams, but I thought it was fascinating. And just before we dive into it, how how weird is it having one team have a bye every single round? Because I remember my friend who I chatted with is Frankston. I was looking for the score and I realized, oh, Frankston had the bye in round one. So it kind of threw me off. Just how does this kind of work? Is it basically where every single round the team's going to get a bye? So you're just kind of up to the schedule makers on when your bye is?
Pretty much, yeah. When there's an odd number of teams, obviously they can't all play every week. In the VFL, they're playing 22 rounds, so which is quite interesting. They have 4 buys for the course of the year, which a lot of the AFL, some AFL teams want, some AFL teams don't. When there was an even number of teams, like in 2021, we had 22 teams. One of those, a standalone side from Queensland, Aspley, dropped out at the end of that season, and you'd sort of have the odd split round as you do in the AFL. They have that split round and a bye in the middle of the year where they only have 6 games a week for 3 weeks. This way, it's the same sort of thing, but the buys are spread out over the whole season. Some weeks only one team has the bye. Other weeks, 3 teams get a week off. Other weeks, there's 5 teams get a week off, just so that everyone gets 18 games. Um, I suppose it's just something we're used to. Uh, it would be ideal to have an even number of teams, no question about that. But without having them, this is the only way you can do it. Frankston, if you're going to have a bye, having it in round one's probably the best because it means you just prepare your season to start a week later.
Mhm.
The one place that you probably don't want to buy is in the last round, in round 22, because if you're fighting for a spot in the finals, you don't want to be having to sit there and wondering whether,
Mm-hmm.
with nothing, really nothing you can do about it. You've just got to rely on other results to fall your way.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Let's jump into it. We'll start with the men's and then we'll go to the women's again. 2 rounds. There's a lot of games to cover. So I'm gonna quick kind of cover the games that have happened, and then Brendan, I'm gonna say I would love for you to kind of break down a couple of what you consider the best games of the rounds, the ones that we really should be talking about. So we'll start off round one in the men's. Geelong get the win by 16, 85-69, a smashing by Collingwood, giving Coburg quite a hiding, 141-49. So it looks like the Collingwood Magpies VFL squad is just as dangerous as their AFL squad. Brisbane edge out Werribee by 170-69. The Suns get a win over Williamstown 83-52. Southport with an absolute hiding of the Sandringham Zebras 118-32. Casey Demons continuing their winning ways 94-57 over the Footscray Bulldogs. North gets nicked by Port Melbourne 86-66. The Swans fall to the Box Hill Hawks 97-70. Richmond Tigers beat North Bull Ants 104-57, and Essendon GWS 119-39. Some absolute crackers here, Brendan. But I kind of went through each of this. What do you think is the game of the round? Because for me, at least score wise, I would think it's this Brisbane Werribee game, a 1 point game, 1 point win by the Lions.
It certainly was, and you can catch your breath now, having picked your way through 10 results. Uh, the Brisbane Lions Werribee game was definitely the match of the round. It was the Lions' first game at their new venue, Michael Voss Oval, which is named after the triple premiership captain from 01, 02, 03, now the Carlton coach, an absolute legend of the game. The Werribee team is a standalone team. They travelled interstate. They were 23 points up at half time. The Lions came charging back. They got the lead. And in pouring rain, Werribee did everything they could, but just couldn't get over the line. So that just shows how good a team the Lions are, that they were able to find a way to win against a good opposition. They're one of their standout teams. They're in fact one of my two picks to play in the grand final, and they showed there that they can win from anywhere. The captain, the cult figure. You've got to call him a cult figure when you've got a name like Buzzer. He kicked 3 goals. He was fantastic. But the Lions, yeah, similar to the AFL. If you've got a good AFL team, there's a fair chance you're going to have a good VFL team, and that's what we've got with the Brisbane Lions. So, yeah, Werribee had their chances, but just couldn't get over the line for a big away victory.
Definitely. So it's a cracking game, and again, sometimes the score isn't always the great indicator either. But it's great to see a standalone side kind of push one of the AFL reserve sides, because sometimes I think I had noticed, at least in some of these scores, it's like the standalone sides sometimes struggle a little bit when they play the AFL sides. So 100%. So let's go to round two. And this time I hopefully can go through it a little bit smoother instead of flying right through it. So we'll jump up. Footscray get nipped by the Brisbane Lions 93-85, a 6 point game there. Frankston finally gets to play their first game, and unfortunately, even at home, Williamstown nips them down at Skybus Stadium 74-47. Southport comes down to North Melbourne, and the Roos get a nice little 8 point win over Southport. The Giants beat the Carlton Blues 83-44. Coburg falls short again against the Richmond Tigers 78-36. Poor Melbourne gets smashed. Collingwood continuing to play Hulk with these other teams. 134-82. Wow. Suns 182-75 over Geelong. That is an impressive scoreline. Holy crap. Casey Demons get the win over the Swans 89-47, and Sandringham with a hiding over Essendon 126-89. This is kind of the round of the big win here. So, do we have a game that you would consider one that I should go back and rewatch after it's already gone through?
Well, there's probably a couple on there. You start with the Thursday afternoon game, our time, Footscray and the Lions, and we were just talking about the Lions, how they're a good team, how they're able to come back from behind. 23 points down at against Werribee. In this game, they were 33 points down midway through the third quarter, and they came back to win by 8, as you mentioned. Once again, showing that they can beat a good team, because Footscray, again, I expect to be a top 10 team. We've moved to a top 10 this year from a top 8, and I expect Footscray to be around that mark. So for the Lions to travel interstate, come from 33 points down and win that game, it was a classic contest, and one that's definitely worth going back and having a look at. I saw the Frankston Williamstown game, and that's probably not one of the ones that you want to use to advertise the game here in to you guys over there in the USA. Frankston early in the last quarter had kicked 1 goal and 16 behinds. And most of those behinds were ones that they should have kicked goals on. So they had every chance to win that game, but couldn't get over the line. North Melbourne's win over Southport, big upset, fantastic result there. But the other one, well, I'll talk about the Gold Coast Suns. 182, that is their highest score ever at state league level from their reserves team. The previous best was 180 back in 2013 when they were in the old Northeastern League. So their highest winning margin in the competition, their highest score in the competition. One player kicked 6 goals in Brodie McLaughlin. 2 others kicked 5 each. So that was just a fantastic free-flowing performance. Big margin, but a great game to watch. And the same I would say about Collingwood and Port Melbourne, which is the other game that I was at on the weekend. The Magpies won by 52 points, but Port Melbourne was with them for the entire game. They just made one crucial mistake midway through the third quarter when they were only down by 4, and Collingwood ran away with it. And again, they're a free-flowing, energetic team, and if you give them a chance, they're just going to run with it and give you a hiding, as you mentioned.
Yeah, the one thing that you got to give though too is that probably with that free flowing is that that it's a good transition from VFL to AFL, so there's not a huge difference in system, which I think it'll be interesting to see how some of the VFL teams kind of handle it, because I know AFL teams are even struggling a little bit trying to handle that free flowing, because it's always attack whenever they can. So
exactly.
Be fascinating to see.
The other one I mentioned. Sorry, Donnie,
ahead.
before you move on. Sandringham, the Zebras, for those that don't know, they are the reserves team of St Kilda, who are absolutely flying at the moment, as you know, despite having half their team out injured. They're 3-0 in the AFL and on top of the ladder. Now, in round 1, as you mentioned, Sandringham lost by 86 points to Southport, and Essendon beat GWS by 80. So for Sandringham to then come back in round 2 and beat Essendon by 37 points was just an amazing performance. And that's another one that if you have 15 minutes to watch what we call the mini match, the highlights, that's a good one to watch as well, because it just shows how even our competition is this year.
Yeah, I would definitely take a look at that one. That one looked like a game that should be fascinating. So I'll definitely take a look at that. So as we were kind of saying off mic, I'll pull the hood off this. I haven't had as much time to be able to keep track of this. As the season goes on, I will definitely watch more of these games and be a little bit more into the conversation as it comes to it. A lot like I do with my AFL. It's just a few things personally, and then so many games for the VFL and VFLW to cover. So this first week, I may not throw as much information as I normally do. So I thank Brendan so much for knowing all of these, and I truly appreciate it. So we go from one to the other. The VFLW now gets its time to shine. It is also 2 rounds in, which is interesting. That I love that the VFL and the VFLW are both played at the same time. So as somebody that kind of covers them both, just before we go to the VFL, the W results, is it difficult to kind of keep track of these 2 competitions? Because I being at the same time, it kind of does my head in a little bit, because I'm always having to go, okay, wait, is this a men's or women's game? I have to remember that. So
no, I actually find it better when they're on at the same time. That they've actually moved the schedule back this year to be on at the same time with the AFLW as it was in 2022 when they had 2 seasons. Last year's VFLW competition ran from February to July, so to sort of more marry up with the AFLW. But then the AFLW moved to the October to December time slot, so they couldn't match up. So they've moved back alongside the VFL. The games are completely different. They're quite a bit shorter. In the VFL, they play 20 minutes plus time on. So quarters usually go for around about 31, 32 minutes. And the VFLW, they just play 20 minutes flat with no time on. So games are over in 80 minutes. So from probably by the time you have the quarter breaks, about 10 minutes short of 2 hours, and a VFLW game is done. And as a result, which you'll run through shortly, you can see that the scores are a lot lower. People criticise the lower scoring, but they're basically playing 50 minutes less football than the men, which has a fair bit to do with the lower scores.
Well, and do the VFLW play 18 aside, or are they 16 aside like the AFLW?
They are 16 aside, and they have 5 on the bench, so they play 21.
Yeah.
So that sort of, it should open the game up a little bit more, but it also means that the players get a lot more tired towards the end of the game, and things slow down a little bit. So but they are developing, women's football. A lot of people criticize it, and they say, how can you watch it, because it is so slow and so low scoring. What I say to them is, you enjoy it for what it is. Don't try and compare it to the men, because remember, women's football has only really been a big thing for around about, well, the AFLW has been going for 7 years. The VFLW has been around for about the same time. There was a competition before that ran for 30 years but had no publicity. So you would say that the AFLW and the VFLW are about 120 years behind the men in when they started. And I'll guarantee you it won't take them 120 years to get to the level the men are at now.
Well, I completely agree, and I've said this in a couple of episodes, and I think I've raised a few brows. I honestly think they should switch rules. I think the men should be playing 16 aside, and I think the women should be playing 18 aside. And I'll fight with that one, because if you look at the men, everybody says, well, they're bigger, they're faster, they're stronger. Okay, then why do they need 18? Why not play 16? Because less people on the field, less congestion, more space for these elite kicks. Why not play 16 aside? So I know it's I kind of threw this on you, Brendan. I'm sorry, but
it's not a bad theory, and it has been done before. It has been the VFA, which is the forerunner to the VFL that we have now. It ran with 16 aside for many years, probably 60 or 70 years, I'd say. And they sort of went to 18 aside when they had to marry up with the AFL and play the same style of football that the men's competition do. I know a lot of reserves comps in local football do play 16 aside. That's mainly just to help clubs stay on the field, because they just don't have the numbers.
Yep.
I certainly think the grounds are big enough to handle the 18. There's no question about that. It's just the fitness and reducing the number of interchanges, which went completely through the roof there for a few years. I know at one stage I was working for the official statistician called Champion Data, and I was recording the interchanges. And in the 5 years that I was doing it, it went from an average of 48 per team per game up to about 130 in the space of 5 years. So that's what created all the congestion, because the players are running on and off the ground. They're that fit. They've brought it back to 75 now, and it's opening games up a bit more. The scores are starting to get a little bit higher. I'd bring that back even further. I'd bring it right back to 60 at the absolute most, 15 a quarter, potentially even 10 a quarter, 40. And that will open the game up completely, because the players will be a little bit tighter.
It'll be interesting to see what they do. If it's usual AFL, they're going to tinker with something. So, all right, let's
Oh,
jump
no.
into it. VFLW. We'll go through the round one results, and again, as you said, the scores may be a little bit, but a couple of absolutely fantastic games just here in round one. We'll start off. Carlton takes down Port Melbourne 44-20, a 24-point win by the Blues. The Southern Saints knock off the Darebin Falcons by 33, 46-13. A cracking game between the Cats and the Roos, a 9-point win by North Melbourne. Collingwood beats Williamstown Seagulls by 15, 28-13. A draw in round one, a lot like the AFL, a 27-27 draw between the Bombers and the Box Hill Hawks. And the Western Bulldogs fall to the Casey Demons 40-28. I mean, I know the draw is interesting. Some people don't like the draws. I think the draws are fascinating. So, besides the draw, sir, would you say that Cats and Brews game, a 9-point game, was one of the games of the round?
Definitely. That was a game between two teams who are probably fighting for the same spots in the bottom of the top six. Geelong did make the finals last year. North Melbourne haven't made the finals for as long as they've been in the VFLW, which I think is 5 years now. So they're desperate to break in. So to go down to Geelong and get that win was very important for them. They've got the ability now with a friendly fixture to potentially be 6 or even 7-0 at the midway point of the season. So that's how important that one was. It'll be interesting to see how things change in the competition now after the AFLW supplementary draft was held during the week. And there were 9 players out of the VFLW that got drafted, so they now change clubs. So that could completely throw things around, and North Melbourne in particular will get stronger because they drafted Williamstown's best player. So that'll improve them. But I've gone off on a completely different tangent there. I know, but
It's
yeah, for
pertinent. It's
North
pertinent. It really is.
yeah, North Melbourne to win that game down in Geelong against a team that made the finals last year. That really opens the door for them. So a great result. And as for the draw, um, interestingly enough, Essendon and the Hawks played a draw in about the second or third last game before the finals last year. So it's their second draw between each other in 3 games, split by a qualifying final result that Essendon won by 53 points, would you believe? So how do you pick that? Um,
Interesting.
the Bombers at this stage remained undefeated since the 2021 preliminary final, and just a wonderful game of football. Forget the fact that it was 27 apiece, and you'd think you'd like more scoring to happen. They are two very good teams and very, very good to watch.
Yeah, it'll definitely be fascinating. I can't wait to really dive into that because I know Essendon last year was just absolutely scintillating. No losses last year. Such a great team. So we jump to round two, and this is the game of absolute crackers as we start off the first couple on Friday on Friday, at least here. Geelong get a 1-point win over the Blues, 22-21. Carlton looks like the Carlton VFL has the same issue as the men, way too many behinds, 2-9 in that game. Box Hill get a 1-point win over the Western Bulldogs, 34-33. North Melbourne beat Williamstown by 11, 35-24. Port Melbourne with a nice little win over Collingwood, 57-20. Holy shnikes. Casey Demons absolutely thrashed Darebin 130-8, a 122-point win. And the last but not least, the Southern Saints with a nice little win over Essendon 42-17. 2 1-point winners early in the round. Which of those two would you say is one that we definitely need to go back and look at because they both look fascinating?
So much to look at and so much to talk about in round two.
Hmm.
Every one of those results is fascinating in its own way. Geelong, as we just mentioned, fighting to stay in that bottom bracket of the finals, losing a home game to go away and beat Carlton in that game. Carlton had a really good start to the season with a big win over Port Melbourne. So the Cats basically regained the loss that they'd given away in the opening game. So that's a great result for them. Carlton is another team looking to break into the top six for the first time. So that just again shows how close it is. Box Hill and Western Bulldogs. When I saw this score, I just thought, wow. In about, I think it was about round 4 last year, these two teams played each other, and the Hawks won 108-7. So, and the Bulldogs last year did not win a game, and they had a percentage of 14, which
Oh,
I suppose best way to explain that to our American fans is that for every 14 points the Bulldogs kicked over the entire season, they conceded 100.
wow.
So for them to come back and almost beat a team like the Hawks, who we just saw drew with the reigning premiers in Essendon,
Hmm.
is just an amazing result and suggests that they have improved out of sight this year, the Bulldogs. So they're one to keep an eye on. Williamstown had an undefeated pre-season, but have now gone down in their first 2 games. And now, as I just mentioned, Williamstown's best player, Ruby Tripodi, she was best for her team against North Melbourne on the Saturday, and 2 days later, North Melbourne drafted her. So that tells you how important playing well in the VFLW is. That
Hmm.
she's now got her chance to live her dream and potentially play AFLW football later this year, just from really good form in games that she needed to perform well in front of the recruiters. Um, Port Melbourne made the finals in their first year. They dropped right out last year. They're actually aligned to Richmond, so they have a few Richmond players playing for them out of the AFLW. Not in the men, only in the women. The men are standalone because Richmond have their own VFL team, of course.
Hmm.
That is an upset. Port Melbourne beating Collingwood and beating them so well, so worth a look. The Casey Demons, Darebin one that you mentioned there, the Demons, well, 130 is the highest score kicked in Casey's history. And it's also the highest score kicked by any team in the VFLW since August 2017. So nearly 6 years since the last team kicked that many points. And ironically, that was Darebin who did that back in 2017. They kicked
Hmm.
135 to, I think it was about 10 against a team that's no longer with us in Seaford. They've dropped down into a lower competition now that the more AFLW reserves teams have come
Hmm.
in. So they handed their license partly over to what's now the Southern Saints. And that's the big one too. Southern Saints and Essendon was last year's grand final. And Essendon did not concede a goal in that grand final. Southern Saints kicked only 7 points for the whole game. And in this game, they've turned the tables. They've won by 25. It's Essendon's first loss since the 2021 preliminary final, as I mentioned. Um, and yeah, the Saints have proved that they're the real deal. They beat Darebin, who are probably going to struggle a little bit this year. A couple of their better players have been drafted since the end of last season, and they haven't been able to replace them. It's great that they're producing AFLW players, but unfortunately, they're not getting those ones coming back the other way. And
Hmm.
it's wonderful for a super power club as they have been, Darebin, to be still playing at this level. I think in the WFL competition, they won 12 premierships in 13 years,
Hmm.
and then won the first 2 in the VFLW. But then the AFLW started realizing, hey, these girls are really, really good footballers. So they've drafted them. They're now off playing AFLW football, and Darebin has turned into a development team
Hmm.
pretty much, which is a shame. But it's great to see that they're still there because they are the pioneers of women's football.
Yeah, well, and being a standalone only VFLW is really, really cool. So I gotta tip my cap to that. And I mean, the who's who that have walked through those walls is kind of insane. So, as I said, I agree with you. It's sad that they've kind of been relegated almost a little bit to being in development, but to still see that the Darebin Falcons still in the league is a good thing, and I hope they can stay there as long as possible. We'll really have to see how it goes for that. So that is going to do it. 2 rounds, so many games, but it's fascinating. I've always heard so much about the VFL and the VFLW. So being able to see that, and the one thing that I have to give kudos to the AFL Live app is the fact that they have at least the mini games and they have the match replays. So somebody like me, that I mean, a lot of these games are happening at 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. my time, and I just always I can't get up 3 or 4 nights in a
Of course
row
not.
that late. So it's been fantastic. And then the fact now that the Waffle, the Sandful are joining there as well. So it's been an incredible addition. So I'm gonna get into this. I can't wait for these next 2 rounds to be able to have a little bit more of a back and forth conversation when it comes to it. So we'll jump to what I call burning questions. These are always kind of questions that kind of go through my mind. They're going to be a little bit simple this round, just because again I haven't had as much time. So just really quickly, we'll start with the men. We'll start with the men since we've covered the men's first. What team or teams have impressed you over these first two games, shall we say, for most of the teams so far in the VFL?
Well, you've got to look at the top in particular. We've spoken about Collingwood and Gold Coast having two big wins in their opening 2 games. They're the top 2 teams on the ladder at the moment. It's going to be an important competition to bank those early wins in. Even with the top 10 in an 18-game competition, you're probably going to need to win 10 or 11 games to make the finals. So getting those early starts are very important, and they both play exciting football. They take it on. If you make a mistake, they hurt you in the other direction. So they're great to watch. The Casey Demons and the Brisbane Lions, they were my 2 picks for the top 2. The grand finalists. Casey, of course, only lost the 1 game last season, which was to the Lions in the last game before the finals. They turned that around and beat them in a prelim. So they will be there and abouts again. They haven't had the big wins that you'd expect just yet, but they will be the standout teams in the competition. I expect to see some more standalone teams step up this year. Southport made the grand final last year. Outstanding performance. They'll be around the mark again, notwithstanding the loss to the Kangaroos. Williamstown and Port Melbourne are the 2 iconic clubs of this competition, and they are in fact playing each other on Good Friday this week for the 259th time in their history. They've been going at it since 1875, Williamstown and Port Melbourne. So if you're going to watch one game this weekend, that is the one to watch. That's 2:05 on Good Friday our time. So I think that would mean, what does that
11:05.
mean? Around about
11:05.
midnight.
The
Around
one
about
thing, the
midnight
one thing
tomorrow
I
night.
gotta give, the one thing I gotta give the AFL, the Watch AFL is it does give my time. So it's actually 11:05 at least my time here in the Central Time Zone, here in the States. So I'll probably end up having to watch it the next day because I work at
Watch it
six
the
in the
next day.
morning. Yeah.
Yeah,
So, but I will definitely watch that one with all that history there. That'll be fantastic. So I'm looking forward to that one. That's crazy that they've played so many times, but it
yeah,
just
and
shows the history of the competition.
it does, and I'll be actually broadcasting that game. So hopefully I can make it enjoyable for everyone watching to start their Good Fridays over there. But yeah, so Williamstown and Port Melbourne, I expect to see them charging up the ladder. They both finished in the bottom 6 last year, which is extremely unfamiliar territory for them. One win and 1 loss each so far. So this one is absolutely critical. And we have a Williamstown player by the name of Jake Greiser, who's playing his 100th game for the Seagulls this week. Again, a wonderful achievement that doesn't happen at VFL level that often anymore. So
Mhm.
great to see him get there, do it for one club. And I actually spoke to him. So if you look up my particular podcast with Chris Yeend called VFL 23 on Amazon, YouTube, Spotify, basically anywhere you can get your podcast, we have a chat with Jake Greiser in that. So that was great to have a talk to him, and looking forward to that game. Just scanning down, I expect Carlton made the finals last year. They're 0-2. Sydney also 0-2 after making the finals last year. They're the 2 teams that need to get a move on. Otherwise, they're in danger of falling off the pace. And the other standalone teams, Frankston, Northern Bullants, and Coburg, look like being in sort of a development phase again this year. But if you take them lightly, they'll certainly turn you over.
That'll be definitely be interesting for there. Yeah, I'm seeing some fascinating ones. So we'll do some tipping and some previewing here in just a little bit. So I want to ask this because as we kind of discussed, the standalone teams usually, unfortunately, have struggled with all of the reserves teams. But Southport last year was the only team that qualified for the finals. So I asked this as the only unattached team in the eight as we speak currently, can they do it again? Do you think Southport has the list to be able to make finals again as an unattached side in the VFL?
Absolutely, no question. They are a big club, the Southport Sharks. For those that don't know, they're probably the biggest licensed Australian rules football club in Australia. Obviously, the AFL clubs are bigger and have the turnover with the members and all that sort of thing, but they actually have a licensed club attached to them. Where people go and play the pokies and have a meal and all that sort of stuff. So they're certainly backed by plenty of resources. Last year they had, I think, 18 former AFL players on their list. This year it's very similar, I think 16 or 17. So they're a very strong club. They've got a very strong list and they'll be able to compete, no question at all, with those other teams. Williamstown and Port Melbourne, as I said, I expect them to be, if not make the top 10, to be very close to it. And Werribee as well. They're one of the strongest teams in the competition, but both of the last two seasons they've underachieved and missed the top 8. So I expect them to be up there as well. So we could realistically have 4 standalone clubs in the top 10, which would be fantastic for
Mm-hmm.
football if those teams could get there this year.
I agree. It'd be fascinating to see. The only worry I think, and maybe it's just me, but the only worry that I'd have as a standalone club is that with the success that you breed, it does make you think, are you going to have some of your players potentially be there when it comes to the draft and that mid-season kind of supplemental draft that the AFL has now? That's the only worry, is that the stronger that you are as a stateside, the more likely you may get picked a little bit when it comes to that mid-season draft. So, and I remember that was one of the biggest talking points that I had with some of the state league people that I talk with, is that mid-season draft sometimes really can hurt some of these unattached teams going through. So definitely something we'll keep an eye on. So we go from the men back over to the women again. Same question as I started the men's with. What teams have impressed you so far? Again, 2 rounds in, no buys with the women because they have an even amount. So most impressive teams so far in the first 2 rounds.
Again, you can't look past the 3 teams that are 2 wins at the top of the ladder. The Casey Demons. Well, the 2 teams that they've played, Casey, are not necessarily expected to be anywhere near the finals. They played the Bulldogs, who didn't win a game last year. They played Darebin, who will probably be in the bottom 2 this year. So, but you can only beat what you come up against, and that's what they've done. So they're going to be around the mark. They're of course Melbourne's aligned team. Melbourne coming off their first AFLW premiership. They had 6 players who played in the AFLW grand final who lined up against Darebin. So you can understand why the poor old Falcons ended up on the wrong end of a scoreline like that. They're a very, very strong team. The Southern Saints, the way they've bounced back after being held goalless in a grand final is remarkable. And we'll see for sure if they can back it up again against the Box Hill Hawks this week. That'll really set them up for the whole season. Essendon will be there again, no question at all. They've played the Hawks. They've drawn with the Hawks, who probably should have made the grand final last year, and they've lost to the Saints, who did make the grand final. So they've had a very hard start to the season. They now have an AFLW team, of course, as does Box Hill with Hawthorn. So things might be a little bit harder for them, but they will be there. They're too good a team not to be
Mm-hmm.
up in the top bracket, and they'll start getting a move on very shortly. Um, what we've seen, apart from Darabin, who's had a tough start of it, having played the grand finalists in the Saints and the preliminary finalists in the Demons, um, that's not the start that you really want when you're a developing club. Williamstown and Western Bulldogs are the other winless teams. They're going to be better this year. I don't think they'll be making the finals, but they'll certainly be much more competitive than they were in most games last season.
Yeah, it'll definitely be interesting, and it's actually kind of a great transition because my other question for the women's is again, Casey has started off strong again, 2-0, and their AFL side's coming off a premiership, so there's a lot of solid players that are coming down. As you said, six that played in that the AFLW Grand Final. So are they would you consider them the favorite right now? Or is there another side that you're kind of penning that favorite when it comes to the VFLW this year?
You can't really name a favourite, I don't think, in the VFLW because you don't know what sort of plan each
Hmm.
club has. With the
Makes
with the
sense.
AFLW season starting at the end of August, which is 8 weeks after the end of the VFLW season. Actually, I think it's 4 weeks. I think the grand final this year is about the 30th of July because they only play 14 rounds, so they play everyone once and then three teams a second time. Um, what happens towards the end of the season and into the finals is the AFLW coaches and that they decide to rest those AFLW players, put them back into pre-season and get them ready for the top season. So the Southern Saints finished fifth in the home and away year last year. They kept those players, those AFLW players, played through, and that's why they were able to win three finals and make it to the grand final when a couple of the teams above them put their players in cotton wool.
Hmm.
Hawthorn, now Box Hill, Geelong did the same thing. They put their players in cotton wool, they arrested them, and those teams fell away in the finals. The Demons, as we mentioned, they've got half a dozen AFLW players at the moment. Will they still be there in round
Hmm.
12, 13, 14 in the finals? You just don't know.
Sure. Yeah.
Essendon last year, they went undefeated, but even though they knew they were coming into the AFLW, they kept all their players playing right through to the end of the VFLW season because it was a 5-year plan, a 5-year build to try and win that VFLW premiership. And they weren't going to throw it away just to prepare for a new competition, which they were never going to win in their
Hmm.
first year.
Makes sense.
So, what do they do the same thing this year, or do they now turn their focus across to
Hmm.
season 8 of the AFLW? So it's a fascinating watch, and it'll completely change who's a chance and who's likely to win that premiership.
Very true, and it does. It makes you think because you almost want to see, like, especially if you do any of the tips and anything like that. So you're like, okay, who's not going to be playing, who is going to be playing, because it really is going to affect how that goes. So yeah, fascinating to see that for sure. So I know we're not gonna speak every week because again, I there's no way I could do 4 podcasts trying to cover all the states. So we're gonna do this
Of
kind of
course,
every other week. But I love tipping. I think tipping is fun. I'm gonna shoot in the dark here a little bit. So if you don't mind, can we tip round 3 for both the men's and the women's comps?
we certainly can do that.
All righty, let's jump into it. We'll start with the men's just because, in fact, as we're recording right now, the first game is about to start probably in about an hour from now, at least if my clock is correct. Is the Brisbane
That is
Lions
right.
at home up in Brighton Homes Arena up in Queensland against Collingwood Pies Lions? Who do you got in this one?
Two undefeated teams, and I see it exactly the same way as the AFL game tonight, our time. You know, early tomorrow morning, your time. Um, I've tipped the Lions to win the game at home. I just think they're a quality outfit. But what the big thing with that one is the Lions have had to come from behind the last 2 weeks. Collingwood have been absolutely rattling goals on in the last quarter.
Mhm.
So if the Lions do fall behind, they won't be catching up this time.
Mhm.
So the first half is a really good watch, a really important watch there to see what's going to happen. But I've got the Lions winning by 10 points.
Yeah, I'm gonna tip Collingwood in this one. I think, as you kind of said, Brisbane having to play catch up in a couple of their games really, I think, is it's a recipe for disaster. Collingwood last year in the AFL kind of they defied that. Normally, I don't like falling behind, especially in multiple games, because it just takes so much energy to come back. So, I mean, if the Pies play the way they have of those first two games, I think they're just going to be too strong. So I'm gonna tip the Pies in this one. We jump to it. The next one will at least Thursday for me. I'm not exactly sure. At Arden Street Oval in Victoria, North Melbourne v Carlton. Carlton looks like they've struggled in this first two games. I think I'm going to tip North in this one. But who do you got?
Um, I'm going for North as well. Very very close game. North finished in the bottom four last year. They've recruited very well. They lost five important players at the end of last season. They replaced them with five players who were freshly delisted out of the AFL. So non-AFL listed players, we're talking the VFL list. So they've now got a very strong VFL list. And like while I said that it's very important. If you've got a strong AFL team, there's a fair chance you've got a strong VFL team. You win your premierships on your VFL list. And that's
Mhm.
what Casey Demons had last year. They had the strongest VFL list, which is about your bottom 8 to 10 players in the team. Um, North Melbourne is the same with that. And I think they'll beat Carlton at home. But if it was at Carlton, I would have tipped the Blues. So it's anybody's game.
Yeah, it'll be a fascinating one. That one's a little bit tough. So, as you said, the old rivals, Williamstown v Port Melbourne and DSV Stadium in Victoria. What do you got in this one?
Same story. Same story. I'm going for Williamstown at home. The home ground at Point Gellibrand there is an almost impossible place to win when Williamstown is playing well. It's right. It's literally right on the bay. It's 50 meters from the water, maybe even less. It's a wonderful sight. So when you do tune into the stream from where we're sitting in our commentary box, you'll see how close the water is,
Hmm.
and it can get quite windy coming off there. And Williamstown plays it beautifully, which is why I'm leaning their way. That this is one of those games where a team walks 6 foot taller when they see that opposition Guernsey on the field
Hmm.
against them. What would be the best example would be, say, if you went to the NBA and I think the Clippers and the Lakers are playing each other this week. So when you see those arch rivals, it makes you walk so much taller.
Hmm.
Um, I'm going for Williamstown at home, but it certainly wouldn't surprise me to see the Borough get up.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna go with you on this one. Sometimes these arch rivalry games, sometimes it does depend on where they play because sometimes you get that hostile crowd and sometimes they affect them. I'm gonna go with Williamstown in this one. It'll be fascinating. I agree with you. This is one again, rivals you just never know. Sometimes they can be really, really pesky. So I can't wait to keep an eye on that one. Coburg hosting GWS at Piranha Park in Victoria. As much as I'd love for Coburg to get a win here, I think GWS is just a little bit too strong in this one. I'm going to go with the Giants.
I have to agree with you. This is actually the second game that I have for broadcast on Saturday morning our time, Friday evening your time. Um, I'm not ruling Coburg out of a chance. Remember, the last time the Giants came to Melbourne back in round one, they were smacked by Essendon, who I
Mhm.
don't think are a top 10 team. Um, Coburg are likely at this stage to be a bottom three team, unfortunately for them. But yeah, so the Giants should be winning. But if they're not right on, this is one that the Lions could pinch, and they'll be certainly eyeing it off as one that they could pinch.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And then an absolute cracker. If what you're saying is completely true, this could be game of the round in the VFL in round three. Southport hosting Werribee and Queensland. Wow, this looks like an absolute cracking game. I'm gonna let you tip this one first. Do the Sharks get it, or can the Tigers go on the road and nip the mighty Sharks up in Queensland?
They can. They can, Werribee. They ran the Brisbane Lions to 1 point up there a couple of weeks ago. It's a nightmare start to the season for Werribee.
Hmm.
Brisbane Lions away, a bye in round two, and then Southport away. So two trips to Queensland in the first 3 weeks, split by a bye. And when they're not known as the fastest starters in the competition. I think Southport will be absolutely breathing fire after losing last week to North Melbourne, and I think they'll win. They'll probably win by about 4 goals. But Werribee is capable, and it wouldn't surprise me once again. It's just a wonderful round. I could get all of these tips wrong, and I'm someone who basically lives this competition. So there's no shame if you get a couple wrong. That's for sure. But Sharks to
Oh,
win for me.
well, I live the AFL and I went 3 of 9 last week, if that tells you
So did
anything.
I,
And I
mate.
and
So
I
did I.
watch and I ingest as much AFL as I do with anything. I'm looking at news articles. I'm watching the shows. Like I have the Watch AFL app, so I get all of the different ones.
Yep.
So I'm watching the Bounce, I'm watching First Crack, I'm watching the Couch, I'm watching all of these talking heads talk about it. So I know exactly how you feel. You can ingest so much, but then sometimes you just never know. So I think I'm going to tip again, home cooking again, as you said. Bye week, you would think maybe Werribee would able to plan for 2 weeks, but sometimes could you be over prepared? I like the Sharks in this one. I think they bounce back on it, but I think this is the cracking game. I think this comes down to the fourth quarter. I would love to know what the weather is going to be like because sometimes it'd be interesting sometimes how Victorian teams handle the Queensland. Again, they went up there once, so maybe it's not going to be as big a deal, but it'd be interesting to see what the weather pattern would be. I'm going to tip Southport, but I think this one comes down late to the fourth quarter. All right, Richmond v. the Footscray Bulldogs at Punt Road at the Swinburne Center in Victoria. I'm flipping a coin on this one. I think I'm gonna tip Richmond. My worry is I think their AFL side's kind of bouncing with some injuries. We'll have to see how that goes. I'm gonna tip Richmond at a home game, but I'm not super confident on this one. So, Brendan, what do you got on this one?
Richmond are undefeated. Footscray are winless, and it's a 50-50 game. Footscray have not played badly at all. They've played the two teams who, as I said, I'm tipping to make the grand final in the Casey Demons and the Brisbane Lions. Whereas Richmond have played the two teams who I've got in the bottom two spots on the ladder, being the Northern Bull Ants and Coburg. Um, I think Footscray is a stronger team. So it's tough to go for a 0-2 over a 2-0.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I actually am going to do that. I'm going to go for Footscray in an upset. Well, I wouldn't call it an upsetted ladder in ladder terms, but
Mm-hmm.
in where they're likely to finish at the end of the season.
Season. Mm-hmm.
If the Bulldogs are going to make the finals, they have to be winning this game.
Yep. 100% agree with you. Another absolute cracker, as you said, Sandringham this year is aligned with the St. Kilda Saints. So Zebras v Gold Coast Suns at RSEA Park. I think this is going to be an absolute cracker. How do you see this one? Can the Suns go down to Victoria and get a win, or do the Zebras continue the run that the Saints are on?
They definitely can. The Suns again, as with the last game, I think the Suns are the stronger team. They've got the stronger list certainly at this level. The injuries, St Kilda are handling the injuries very well at the moment. Sandringham, well, an amazing performance from them to beat Essendon last week. They will be very confident. It's not at their regular home ground, which is Trevor Barker Oval, which is Sandringham's home ground. It's at St Kilda's training venue,
Mhm.
RSEA Park. That's known as the Old Moorabbin, where the Saints have played at. They played at before it was their last suburban venue. Um, yeah, I went for the Suns. I thought coming down off an 18 goal win, I think they might have a little bit too much goal scoring power for the Zebras.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna go with the Suns in this one. They've just looked so strong in these first two games. Again, I like the positive momentum. They travel well, and I think the injury list in St. Kilda I think could hurt Sandringham in the long run. So I'm gonna go Suns on this one. All right, the Northern Bull Ants versus the Essendon Bombers at ETU Stadium in Victoria. I'm gonna go Essendon in this one. I've never been confident with Northern very much. They've seemed like they've struggled a lot. So I'm gonna go Essendon on this one.
Yeah, sad to see. The Bull Ants lost a lot of their experience at the end of last year, what they were building since they came back into the competition. It makes it tough for them. They've lost this game at their home ground. It's been moved away to Port Melbourne's home ground due to the venue still undergoing repairs from cricket season. So that makes it a little bit harder again, and I think the Bombers they'll bounce back from that loss to Sandringham and have a good win in this one.
Yeah, so we jump to it. Another one that unfortunately seems like a massive mismatch as the Casey Demons at Casey Field take on the Frankston Dolphins. I have to guess on this one, Casey and Casey Big?
Yeah, they just don't lose at home, Casey. It's as simple as that. And like if they do, it's a massive upset, regardless of who they're playing. Um, if Frankston goes and kicks 1 goal 16 for 3 quarters again, they'll find themselves losing this one by 20 goals.
Mm-hmm.
If they play to their ability, they can certainly push Casey for probably 2.5 to 3 quarters, but they won't be able to go with them for the whole game, I don't think.
Yeah, unfortunately, got to kick straight, or you're going to be in trouble very very quickly. So yeah, I have Casey in this one, and last but not least, the last one, Geelong v Box Hill MCG. Always fascinating to see a VFL game at the MCG. Who do you got in this one?
Love seeing it when it happens. It doesn't happen anywhere near enough. I don't get me wrong. I love going to the suburban venues too. This is a curtain raiser to the Easter Monday clash at the MCG between the Cats and the Hawks. The Hawks a wonderful victory over the Swans in Sydney in round one. The Cats, well, they'd be what are they? They're 1-1 at the moment, coming off that 18-goal loss to the Suns, back down to Melbourne. They've had a long time to stew over it, so they will play a lot better. They do have the reigning premiership coach in Mark Corrigan, who has crossed from the Casey Demons, so you would expect them to be much better. But it's the Hawks to win this one for me. I think they're a little bit stronger.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna go with you on this one. This one was tough because looking at the results, this was hard to kind of pick an easy one. So I will go with the Hawks on this one. So we jump to the men, back to the women. A fascinating round three. I love this. As I said, I love that they keep both the men and the women keeping the rivalry going as Williamstown play Port Melbourne in the women's competition. Who do you got in this one?
This proves how new the women's comp is compared to the men. 259 times, as we mentioned, the men have gone head to head. This is the third game between the women. Um, but there's already a fair rivalry there. They're 1-1. Williamstown, I would have tipped Williamstown to win this one at home, but Ruby Tripodi, who we mentioned earlier on, will not be there. She's now at North Melbourne. That's going to really set the Seagulls back. So for that reason, I think Port Melbourne gets the points.
Yeah, I after you kept saying that, I kind of they were originally my tip being at home, but I think we'll go Port again. That big win over Collingwood, I think it's got a lot. I gotta have a lot of confidence for that one for the Port Melbourne. So Port Melbourne in that one, the Western Bulldogs v North Melbourne, ETU Stadium, Victoria. This one's tough. AFLW, I'd tip North Melbourne. So I look at this. I think I'll go. What the heck? I'll go the Western Bulldogs in this one. I'll just flip a coin on this one. So who do you got in this one?
I've got the Kangaroos. The Bulldogs, obviously, a much improved team from last year. But when you're sitting on, I think it's at least 16 losses in a row for the Bulldogs. They were 0-14 last year. They're 0-2, despite being much improved this year. I think they won their last game in 2021, which is the last time they've sung this song. I'd have to go back and check that. But until they do manage to find a way over the line, it's pretty hard to tip them. So the Kangaroos to win for me, but it wouldn't surprise me to see the drought break.
Yeah, I'm always one to go for a crazy one, just for giggles. So, all right, the big one again, another one down at Casey is the Casey Demons take on the Collingwood Magpies at Casey Fields. Who do you got in this one?
There's 3 Good Friday games in the VFLW. This is the third of them. I think Casey Demons win. I had it being much closer before the results of last week, with Collingwood going down significantly to Port. And I see Casey as being a stronger team than Port. So it's the Demons to win for me reasonably comfortably.
Yeah, I'm the same way. Demons in this one, that loss to Port Melbourne really kind of I think hurt him. In a Ken Casey, he's just so good. As long as they have those AFLW players in there, it's hard to tip against them. We jump to the next one, Geelong v Darebin. Again, as we kind of said, Darebin being that developmental club, so I think I'm going to go with the Cats in this one. I'm hoping Darebin can keep this one a little bit closer, so it's a nice competitive game. So, who do you got in this one?
Agree completely with everything you said there. Geelong will win. I've got no doubt about that on Saturday. But yeah, we just want to see green shoots as the buzz term here in Australia for a young team. We want to see green shoots from Darabin. I think we will, but the Cats to win.
Yeah, completely agree. We go to the hangar as Essendon take on Carlton. I think this is kind of the perfect opportunity for Essendon here. I think the Bombers get their win after a couple of tough games to start the season. So I got the Bombers in this one. Who do you have in this one?
Yeah, Essendon to win pretty easily. I think it's the first time that we get to see how they go on the rebound after a defeat.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I think Carlton would be very disappointed with losing to Geelong, so they'll come out hungry. But I think the Bombers should have too much in reserve.
Yeah, and then the last one, absolute cracker. Southern Saints v the Box Hill Demons at RSEA Stadium. Who do you got winning this one?
Yeah, this one's the match of the round, no question about that.
Yep.
Um, the Saints coming off a big win over the Bombers. The Hawks had the draw with the Bombers and just got over the Bulldogs. So I think the Saints are in unbelievable form at the moment, and I've got them winning the game. But again, Box Hill is good enough to push them all the way and get the result if they're not quite on. But Saints for me.
Yeah, I'm the same way. Southern Saints win this. They look when you can beat the reigning premiers and beat them handily, it's hard to tip against them. I think they've got a lot of positive momentum. Box Hill will test them, but I think the Saints just by a bit. So, Brandon, wow, a jam-packed, full of information VFL Vantage Point podcast. This has been fantastic. I genuinely appreciate you coming on. Your knowledge of the VFL is fantastic. Thank you for sharing with me, and thank you for hopping on the podcast today.
No worries at all. Thanks very much, Donny. Hope everyone's enjoyed it, and yeah, have a great Easter. Enjoy the footy, and yeah, we'll speak in a couple of weeks.
Yep, can't wait. We'll be back again in a couple of weeks with another episode of VFL Vantage Point from Donnie's Disposals. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening, and we will be back again very, very soon.